A car parked beneath the trees, a scream cut off by gunfire, blood sprayed across the gravel road. They told you it was random, but nothing about 1946 was random. Texarkana was a quiet border town, until the night a hooded figure stepped out of the shadows and turned lovers' lanes into killing fields. He carried a gun with the calm precision of someone who had used it before. He spoke few words, but every syllable cut like a command. No rage, no hesitation, no humanity. The newspapers called him the Phantom Killer. 5 people dead, 3 more clinging to life. A town paralyzed, hiding behind locked doors and drawn curtains. But here's the part they never told you. This wasn't chaos spilling over. This was control tightening its grip. Every witness remembered the same thing before the gunfire, a silence so heavy it felt alive, like the town itself was holding its breath. Then boots on gravel, then death. The law swept in with sirens and searchlights. Texas Rangers, sheriffs, detectives flooding the streets. But the Phantom always stayed one step ahead. No fingerprints, no footprints, no mistakes. Almost as if he knew where they would look before they looked. Almost as if someone wanted him to walk free. And while the town begged for answers, the people in power whispered in dark rooms. They told you this was the work of a madman. But madmen are messy. This was something colder, something built, not born. The fear was perfect, the timing flawless, and the message clear. Someone else decided who lived and who died in Texarkana. They buried the truth in sealed files and closed cases. They told the world the Phantom vanished. But killers like this don't vanish. They wait, they learn, they evolve. You've heard this story before in legends and films, but tonight you're going to hear what really happened. The truth they tried to burn, the truth that bleeds through the lies, the truth that still walks Texarkana's streets when the moon is high and the air goes still. So take a breath now, because the deeper we go, the less air there will be. By the second murder, Texarkana was already changing. The town that once trusted its neighbors began to fear its own shadow. Windows stayed dark after sunset, doors bolted, shotguns kept near the bed. A curfew crept over the streets. Unspoken at first, then enforced by men in uniforms. But it wasn't just fear of the Phantom. It was fear of something bigger, fear of being watched. Not just by a killer, but by unseen eyes, because everywhere you went someone was already there. Park your car on a lonely road. Headlights would appear behind you. Step onto your porch after midnight. A shape would move across the street and vanish. That silence before the gunfire, the same silence the town felt now every night. A silence so thick it swallowed the sound of crickets. It was as if the whole city held its breath waiting for permission to exhale, and permission never came. The newspapers told one story, a faceless maniac loose in the dark, but the whispers told another. They said the killer knew the roads better than anyone. They said he knew when the patrols would pass. They said he knew which couples would be alone and which wouldn't, as if he had help, as if someone was guiding him through the hunt. The Phantom wasn't just terrorizing Texarkana, he was training it, teaching people how quickly they could be broken, showing how fast a free town could kneel, if you just gave it the right nightmare. Business owners put bars on their windows. Gun stores sold out of ammunition. Theaters played horror reels while the real horror walked the streets outside. And the people who claimed to protect you, they smiled for the cameras, shaking their heads at the tragedy, while quietly making sure the fear never went away. Why did the search always arrive too late? Why did every lead die before it spoke? And why did the Phantom seem to know where to vanish? These aren't questions a random madman could answer, someone. Ian Texarkana wasn't afraid of the Phantom. Someone was feeding him. The murders would grow bolder, the town would grow quieter. And every night, when the moonlight hit the gravel roads just right, that same silence would fall again. A silence so deep, you could hear boots in it. They called him the Phantom because no one ever saw his face, but the few who survived saw something worse than a face. They saw the mask, a white hood pulled tight, holes cut for the eyes, no markings, no features, nothing human about it, just emptiness staring back at you under moonlight. The first survivors described it in whispers, how the mask moved closer while the gun stayed steady, how his breathing never changed, even when he pulled the trigger. No laugh, no shout, no sign of life behind the cloth, only silence, as if death itself had learned to walk, and that mask began to haunt Texarkana more than the man who wore it. Children dreamed of it. Women swore they saw it at their windows. Men loaded their rifles but still felt naked against it, because the mask meant more than a killer in the dark. The mask was a message. A man hides his face when he fears punishment. But what kind of man hides his face because he knows there will be none? What kind of man kills without leaving a trace, while the law swarms around him and never even gets close? The mask told Texarkana the truth, even if they didn't want to hear it, that this wasn't just some drifter passing through. This wasn't just bad luck. This was planned. This was allowed. Every attack felt timed. Every escape felt rehearsed, almost like someone wanted the legend of the Phantom to grow. The more they failed to stop him, the more powerful he became. And the more powerful he became, the quieter the town got. Fear was no longer just a feeling. It was an order. People asked why no sketch of the Phantom was ever clear, why every description blurred together, as if the witnesses themselves were being told what to remember and what to forget. Because the mask wasn't supposed to be identified. It was supposed to stay a shadow, something you can't shoot, can't catch, can't kill. And while the papers sold terror on every front page, and the law clowes, they were closing in, the Phantom only got bolder. The mask would appear again, under that same pale moon, on those same gravel roads, and when it did, Texarkana would learn. The real nightmare wasn't who the Phantom was. It was who wanted him out there. Before the Phantom, couples parked on lonely roads without a second thought. The trees were their walls, the stars their ceiling. But by April of 1946, those roads were deserted. The lovers who still dared to park never came home. On one night, headlights cut through the branches and slowed to a crawl. A young couple thought it was just another car passing by. Then the engine went quiet. Boots crunched on gravel, and a voice ordered them out of the car. He wore the mask. The gun glinted under the moon. The silence was absolute, heavy, waiting for the shot. And when it came, it was quick, methodical, almost surgical. The girl screamed once, only once, before the darkness swallowed her sound. The town changed overnight. No music in the diners, no laughter in the streets. Even the dogs stopped barking at night, as if they felt it too. The Phantom wasn't just killing people. He was killing the spirit of Texarkana. Parents warned their children to stay inside. Theaters closed early. Dances were cancelled. Every knock at the door after dark made hands reach for loaded shotguns. Men patrolled their own neighborhoods, rifles across their backs. But no one patrolled the roads where young blood had soaked the dirt, because no one wanted to be next. The Phantom's attacks always followed a pattern, a parked car, a sudden silence, then death under the moonlight. It was as if he was teaching Texarkana a lesson. No freedom, no love, no trust, only fear. And still the law failed to stop him. Texas Rangers stormed into town, big hats and bigger guns, promising to end it all. But every time they closed in, the Phantom slipped away. Every lead dried up. Every suspect walked free. It was almost as if someone kept opening doors for him, while others slammed them shut. People started asking dangerous questions. What if this wasn't just a madman hunting at random? What if the Phantom was being protected? What if the real danger wasn't in the mask, but in the hands shaking it behind the scenes? Texarkana didn't just stop parking after dark. It stopped breathing. Because every night that moonlight touched the road, you could still hear boots in the silence. They called it the biggest manhunt in Texarkana history. Rangers, sheriffs, state police. Men with badges and guns swarming the border roads. Every farmhouse searched, every stranger questioned. Roadblocks went up, floodlights cut through the trees at night. They promised the people the Phantom had no place left to hide, but he kept killing anyway. What kind of ghost moves through a town crawling with lawmen? What kind of killer knows which roads to avoid, which doors to slip past? Unless the hunt itself was just theater, a show of force meant to calm the town while letting the terror do its work. Every suspect they paraded in front of cameras, every man they dragged from his home and called a monster, somehow walked free within days. The evidence never stuck, the stories never matched, and the killings never stopped. It was almost too perfect, like the phantom was untouchable, not because he was invisible, but because someone made him invisible. Rangers swore they'd stake out every road where couples parked. Yet when the next attack came, no one was there to stop it. Sheriffs swore they'd chase down every lead. Yet every lead went cold the moment it reached their desks. And every time the town cried for answers, the officials told them to stay calm, stay inside, trust the process. But the process was fear. The manhunt wasn't to catch the phantom. It was to make sure no one else tried. Texarkana began to realize something ugly. This wasn't a search. It was a performance. And somewhere behind the badges and the headlines, someone was watching the town fold in on itself, studying how far it would bend before it broke. The phantom didn't just choose his victims. Someone chose his hunting ground, and every time those boots crunched on gravel under the moon, the town learned another lesson. The people who swore to protect you aren't always on your side. The mask stayed in the dark, the gun stayed loaded, and the manhunt, the greatest ever assembled here, was never meant to succeed. By the summer of 1946, Texarkana wasn't just afraid. It was mute. People didn't talk about the phantom anymore, at least not in daylight. The bars went quiet, the diners whispered, and even church pews felt empty, because anyone who spoke too loudly seemed to regret it. Witnesses vanished into silence. Neighbors who claimed to see a strange car parked near the woods. Neighbors who swore they recognized a voice under that mask. Within days they changed their stories or disappeared altogether. It was as if someone was going door to door, erasing the truth. The town began to police itself, not against the phantom, but against each other. If you asked the wrong questions, you were told to shut your mouth. If you hinted the killer might have friends in high places, you found yourself alone. And that silence before the gunfire, the same one that haunted every road, it now hung over the entire city like a fog. Even the press grew cautious. Reporters who dug too deep found their sources drying up overnight. Leads buried, files missing, phones ringing with voices that warned them off, so they stuck to safe headlines. Killer still at large. Never, why can't they catch him? Because the real danger wasn't just out in the woods. It was sitting in the offices downtown. Fear is powerful, but controlled fear is absolute. Make a town scared enough, and they'll do anything you tell them. Make them scared enough, and they'll even turn against themselves. That's what happened here. Texarkana didn't just hide indoors at night, it hid its own truth. The phantom didn't have to silence witnesses. The town did it for him. Every locked door, every closed curtain, every unspoken rumor was another victory. Because once fear starts running the show, no one needs to pull the trigger anymore. The people do it themselves. To their own voices, to their own courage. Boots on gravel. A mask in the dark. But worse than the killer was the way the town learned to live with him. To bow their heads, to stop asking why. The phantom wasn't just hunting couples. He was teaching Texarkana to obey. When fear is high and answers are few, people will believe anything. And that's when the parade of suspects began. First came the drifter. A man passing through on freight trains, wearing old boots and carrying no name anyone remembered. The papers called him dangerous. The law called him a prime lead. But within days he was gone. Charges dropped. Nothing stuck. The phantom killed again that same week. Then came the troubled veteran. Haunted eyes, steady hands, knew how to handle a rifle. The town whispered his name like it was already decided. But when investigators pushed, the evidence collapsed. His alibi held. The murders went on. The scariest suspect was the local boy, well-liked, church-going, smiling for neighbors by day. But at night people swore they saw his truck parked where the phantom walked. They questioned him, searched his home, even leaked his name to the papers, and yet no arrest, no trial, no closure, as if someone wanted him ruined but not caught. One by one the suspects piled up, and one by one they vanished from the headlines. The authorities told the people, "We're close." The papers told the people, "We've found him." But the phantom kept moving, boots crunching gravel, mask gleaming under the moon, and every false lead made the town trust the law a little less and fear the killer a little more. It began to feel like someone wanted this confusion. Every new suspect kept attention off whoever was really behind the mask. Every staged arrest distracted from the fact that the phantom knew every move the law would make before they made it, almost like he had friends on the inside. The people of Texarkana were given villains to hate, names to curse, faces to burn in their minds, but none of them fit the silence. None of them fit the way the phantom struck without panic, without mistakes, without leaving a single thread to pull. By the end of summer, the town was exhausted. Ted, they'd been lied to, toyed with and used. And still, under the moonlight, that mask waited for the next pair of headlights to slow on a gravel road. Patterns are dangerous because they tell you when evil is thinking instead of just striking. And by the fourth attack, Texarkana should have known they weren't dealing with madness. They were dealing with precision. Every killing happened on weekends under a waxing moon, always on the outskirts of town, where the roads turned to gravel and the trees closed in like curtains, always targeting couples who thought they were alone but weren't. The phantom never rushed. He approached from the shadows, boots soft but steady, breathing calm, not a sound except the click of the hammer, the scream cut short, and the long silence afterward. That silence was his calling card, like the town itself was holding its breath, waiting for permission to exhale. Investigators called it coincidence. They said he was just a predator looking for easy prey. But if that were true, why never once did he pick a house at random? Why never once attack in a crowded street or a well-lit gas station? Why always where fear could spread the fastest? The places young people gathered, the places parents warned their kids to avoid. This wasn't impulse. It was design. Some residents noticed it. They whispered that the phantom wasn't hunting lovers. He was hunting freedom itself. Every couple killed sent a message. You're not safe anywhere. You can't even trust the dark roads you grew up driving. Every shot fired tightened the leash around the whole town. But the authorities refused to admit a pattern. Because a pattern means planning, and planning means power. And no one wanted to admit that whoever wore that mask wasn't just a murderer. He was something worse, a man with a mission. Even the timing of the attack seemed staged, long enough between murders to let fear die down, then sudden and brutal, just when people started to feel normal again. It was like someone flipping a switch, testing how fast a whole city could be paralyzed over and over again. By the fall of 1946, Texarkana didn't just fear the phantom. They started to suspect the phantom had a map of their fear. And he was following it step by step. It happened on a humid night in late spring. A deputy, working off a tip, spotted a parked car at the edge of a dirt road. No lights, no movement, just two silhouettes inside. Young, careless, exactly the kind of prey the phantom loved. But the deputy wasn't alone this time. Two more cars waited down the road, engines off, rifles ready. If the phantom showed up, they'd finally have him boxed in. Minutes passed like hours. Then, from the tree line, that sound again. Slow boots on gravel. The deputy swore later he felt the air go still, like the entire countryside was holding its breath. The figure stepped out of the darkness, mask gleaming pale in the moonlight, shotgun at his side. He raised it toward the car. That's when the deputy shouted, "Freeze!" Gunfire erupted, the night tearing open. Bullets ripped through the trees. The parked car shattered in a storm of glass. But when the smoke cleared, the phantom was gone. No body, no blood trail, no sign of a wounded man crawling off to die. Just silence, heavy and unbroken, as if the woods themselves swallowed him whole. The law swore they had him this time. But deep down they knew better. The phantom didn't run in panic. He slipped away like he'd known the trap was coming, like he'd been watching them, listening to their radios, memorizing their moves before they made them. Some officers whispered about an inside leak, someone feeding him warnings, tipping him off. Others wondered if he was one of their own, a man trained to vanish under fire, calm when bullets cracked past his head, someone who knew the badge well enough to walk through the hunt untouched. That failed ambush shattered what little confidence Texarkana had left. If the law couldn't catch him in a perfect setup, when would they ever? The phantom wasn't just lucky, he was untouchable, and as always, after every close call, he disappeared long enough to let the town relax, just long enough to prove he was still in control when the next shot rang out. By the end of 1946, Texarkana wasn't living under law anymore. It was living under fear dressed up as law. Every night, the streets emptied hours before dark. Patrol cars roamed like predators, shining spotlights into parked cars, barking orders at anyone who lingered too long. It didn't matter if you were guilty. In Texarkana, everyone was guilty of something. Being out late, driving the wrong road, looking like you might be in love. The phantom gave the authorities the excuse they'd been waiting for. Roadblocks sprouted overnight. Searches without warrants became routine. Young men were dragged out of their cars and questioned at gunpoint. Neighbors started informing on neighbors just to prove they weren't hiding anything. Boots on gravel. A mask in the dark. But now the mask had two faces. One stalked lovers in the woods. The other wore a badge and said it was for your own good. Every warning fed the panic. Stay indoors. Don't trust strangers. Don't meet anyone in the dark. But the more rules they gave, the less anyone could breathe. The same fear that made the town obey also made it blind. Nobody asked who really benefited from all this control. Nobody asked why the phantom always slipped away, while ordinary men filled the jail cells. Some said the killer was the reason for the crackdown. Others whispered the crackdown was the reason for the killer. What better way to tighten a leash than to prove what happens when you disobey? And every time a headline screamed, "Phantom strikes again." The leash got tighter. The town bowed lower. By Christmas, Texarkana was a different place. People kept curtains drawn even at noon. Couples no longer parked on quiet roads. They barely spoke to each other in public. The killer hadn't just taken lives. He'd taken the soul of the town. And the men with power smiled grimly, saying they were protecting everyone. But what if that was the point?
And all along, what if the murders weren't chaos but order? Not the breakdown of control, but the perfect excuse to seize it.
Fear is not just an emotion, it's a tool. Sharp, precise, and easy to use on anyone who thinks they're too tough to feel it. By early 1947, the phantom hadn't struck in weeks. The murders stopped, but the fear didn't. People still locked their doors, still jumped at headlights in the rearview mirror, still looked over their shoulders when the moon came out. The phantom didn't need to kill anymore. The damage was already done. And that's when the question started. What if Texarkana wasn't just unlucky? What if it was chosen? Every lawman said they were hunting a madman. But the pattern looked less like madness and more like an experiment. Weekend attacks, measured silence between murders, perfectly timed to keep the town balanced between panic and relief. Someone was studying how fear spreads, how long it lasts after the blood dries, how easy it is to make an entire population obey when they're convinced death is waiting just outside their door. The phantom was the trigger, but the reaction, the curfews, the raids, the constant surveillance, that was the real test. How fast could freedom be replaced with control if you gave people a reason to beg for it? Some locals swore federal agents were in town, not to catch the killer, but to watch the fallout. Strangers in suits, taking notes at crime scenes, whispering in the ears of city officials. They didn't wear badges, but everyone knew they had authority higher than the sheriff. And when the killing stopped, those men disappeared as quietly as they came, leaving a question no one wanted to ask out loud. Was the phantom even real, or was he just a mask, a story to terrify a city into becoming a laboratory? Think about it. 5 dead, 3 wounded, and no suspect ever convicted. No weapon recovered, no clear motive, only terror, pure, raw, and perfectly aimed. Fear wasn't the byproduct of these murders. It was the purpose. And once you see fear used this way, you never forget it. If you're still watching this, comment this phrase twice. The mask never comes off. Let me see how many of you are ready to stop being afraid of the dark and start looking at who's holding the light. His name was U.L. Swinney, a drifter, a car thief, a man who fit the phantom's shadow like a second skin. He was arrested in the summer of 1946 on unrelated charges. Forgery, stolen vehicles, the kind of crimes that kept him on the move but never behind bars for long. When police caught him, his young wife blurted something chilling. She told them her husband was the Phantom. She described the murders in detail, things no outsider could know. The sound of the shotgun, the way he approached from behind, the mask gleaming in the moonlight. But there was a problem. Under Texas law, a wife couldn't testify against her husband. Her confession was useless in court. Investigators pushed hard. They found stolen cars matching vehicles spotted near the crime scenes. They found people who swore Swinney bragged about getting away with murder. But every piece of evidence slipped through their fingers. Nothing tied him directly to the killings. No fingerprints, no weapon, no confession. And then something strange happened. When Swinney was sent to prison for car theft, the murders stopped. Texarkana breathed again, but no one said it out loud. Because if he really was the Phantom, why didn't the law announce it? Why not close the case and declare the town safe? Some whispered. Swinney had friends in high places. Others believed he wasn't the killer at all. Just a convenient scapegoat, a man to take the heat while the real Phantom disappeared. Years later, when journalists tracked Swinney down after his release, he laughed off the accusations. He said nothing, admitted nothing, just smiled like a man who knew more than he'd ever say. Even his wife changed her story, then changed it back again. First he was the Phantom, then he wasn't, then maybe he was. Truth twisted like smoke around the man's name until nobody could hold it steady. If Swinney was innocent, the real killer walked, free forever. If Swinney was guilty, someone made sure the public would never know. Either way, Texarkana never got justice. Only silence. And silence is exactly what the Phantom wanted. Decades later, when researchers dug through the dusty archives of Texarkana, they found something no one was supposed to see. 2 files, dated the same week in 1946, telling 2 different stories. One claimed the Phantom killer had been caught and quietly locked away. No names, just a closed case stamp, as if the nightmare had been solved behind closed doors. The other file, written just days later, described a brand new attack in the same chilling detail as the earlier murders. Same mask, same weapon, same boots on gravel approaching in silence. Which one was true? Both couldn't be. The more investigators searched, the worse it got. Police reports contradicted FBI memos. Sheriff's notes didn't match newspaper statements. Witness descriptions were rewritten after the fact, as if someone wanted the record to stay blurry forever. Some of those documents mysteriously vanished. Others were marked for destruction, burned, shredded, or locked in personal safes no one could access. The official story said evidence was lost over time, but locals whispered another explanation. It wasn't lost, it was buried. Imagine finding a case file where the ink tells you the killer was stopped, but the blood says he wasn't, where a name is written in one report and blacked out in the next, where the truth bends to fit whoever is holding the pen. If law enforcement really knew who the Phantom was, why hide it? And if they didn't know, why pretend they did? This wasn't just sloppy record-keeping, it felt deliberate, as if someone wanted to make sure no outsider could ever piece it together, because once you destroy enough of the past, no one can prove anything. Guilt disappears. Innocence disappears. Only fear remains. Journalists who tried to push for answers were warned to drop it. Some even claimed they were followed at night, headlights trailing them down those same back roads where the Phantom once hunted. It was as if the mask never really came off.
It just traded faces. When the truth is this twisted, it stops being about catching one man. It becomes about protecting a story, the story they wanted you to believe. Texarkana tried to move on. New stores opened, kids grew up, people married and buried their dead. But something in that town never went back to normal. It wasn't just grief. It was something heavier, something permanent. Ask anyone who lived there in the late 40s. They'll tell you about the sound of boots on gravel at night, about headlights slowing down on empty roads, about the silence that fell over every front porch when the sun went down. Fear became part of the air, a smell, a weight, a memory etched into the streets themselves. People stopped trusting strangers, neighbors stopped trusting each other, and every time a loud noise cracked the night, the town froze. Waiting for the phantom to return, the murders faded from national headlines, but they burned themselves into Texarkana's bones. Parents warned their kids never to park on lonely roads. Couples who dared to sneak out after dark swore they felt someone watching them from the trees. The mask became a ghost. Not just a face, but an idea that no one was safe, no matter who you were or where you hid. Some folks say the killer still walked among them, laughing in their faces at church or passing them in the grocery store. Others believed the real phantom left town and kept killing somewhere else, and a few whispered something even darker, that the phantom never had to strike again because his real work was done. The murders didn't just leave scars, they reshaped the town itself. People welcomed curfews, roadblocks, police patrols, anything to feel protected, even if it meant giving up freedom. No one questioned it. No one wanted to be the next body found on a gravel road under the moonlight. That's how fear works. It doesn't just paralyze you, it trains you, and Texarkana learned its lesson well. The phantom didn't just kill 5 people, he killed the sense of safety itself. Even now, generations later, locals tell the story in hushed tones, and every time they do, they glance over their shoulders, just to make sure no one else is listening. The phantom killer didn't fade into history, he grew. The less people knew about him, the more powerful he became. By the 50s and 60s, Texarkana teenagers were daring each other to park on those same moonlit roads just to prove they weren't afraid. But the truth is, they were afraid. That's why the legend worked. Every creak of the woods, every crunch of gravel underfoot felt like his return. Parents used his name like a warning bell. Be home before dark, or the phantom will find you. The press called him a madman. But in Texarkana, he became something more. A shadow that slipped between fact and nightmare. The man in the mask wasn't just real. He was eternal. And once a killer becomes a story, he doesn't have to strike again to keep killing in people's minds. Hollywood came calling in 1976, turning the murders into a horror film. The tagline promised, "The town that dreaded sundown." And the town lived up to it. Locals filled theaters, watching their own terror played back to them on screen. Some hated it, some loved it. But no one denied the power of the phantom, the mask, the footsteps, the silence before the gunfire. They became symbols, not just of one man, but of every fear you can't put a face to. The more the story spread, the less anyone cared about what really happened in 1946. Evidence mattered less than atmosphere. The truth got buried under the myth, and the myth was far harder to kill. Even today, Texarkana holds a yearly screening of that old film. Outdoors, under the same moonlight where real blood once spilled, they call it tradition. But some see it as a ritual, a way to keep the legend alive, to feed it so it never starves. Because the phantom isn't just a story you tell. He's a reminder that no matter how much light you shine, there's always something waiting in the dark. And when you look too long at the mask, you start to wonder if it's looking back at you. The phantom wasn't the only shadow stalking America in the 1940s. Across small towns and quiet highways, couples were being ambushed in parked cars, attacked on lonely roads, murdered under the same moonlight that bled over Texarkana. Different states, different weapons, but the pattern was always the same. A sudden strike, a masked face, and then nothing. No trace, no arrest, no explanation. Lawmen dismissed it as coincidence. They always do, but how many coincidences does it take before you see a design? A string of unsolved killings in Florida. Lover's Lane attacks in California. Even whispers of similar crimes in the Midwest. They happened before Texarkana. And after. If the phantom was just one man, how did his shadow reach so far? Some believed he was a drifter, moving state to state, hunting wherever darkness covered his escape. Others thought it was bigger than one man, a method, a blueprint that anyone could follow. The mask became a symbol not just of fear, but of invitation. Commit the perfect crime. Leave no trace. Let the legend take the blame. The FBI quietly compared notes, though they never admitted it publicly. They saw the same clues repeated. Mismatched boot prints, missing shell casings, bullets filed to disguise the gun. It was almost too clean, as if someone wanted the trail to go cold. And that's the question no one in Texarkana wanted to ask. What if the phantom wasn't alone? What if he was part of something larger? A network of killers studying each other, copying each other, learning how to stay invisible? Because by 1946, law enforcement was already being outsmarted. The killer didn't just vanish. He adapted. Each murder was a test, each escape a lesson, until the mask itself became untouchable. That's how you turn a man into a myth. That's how you turn murder into a message. And if this was practice, if Texarkana was only one stop on a much darker road, then the phantom didn't retire. He just passed the mask to someone else. Every town has its talkers, the ones who can't keep quiet, the ones who see too much. And in Texarkana, some of those talkers started connecting dots the police wouldn't touch. They noticed the same cars parked near murder scenes, the same strangers asking too many questions, the same stories whispered by soldiers just back from the war, stories that sounded a little too familiar. One journalist claimed he had proof the phantom was tied to someone in law enforcement. Weeks later, he left town and never came back. A deputy who pushed too hard to reopen a case was reassigned to another county overnight. Neighbors swore they saw him burning papers in his backyard before he left. It wasn't just rumors. It was a pattern. Anyone who got close to the truth was either silenced, shamed, or scared into disappearing. They called it paranoia, but what if it wasn't? There were files that went missing from county records, leads that died on the vine, evidence that somehow slipped into the wrong hands. One detective admitted off the record that he was told to let it go, that digging deeper would cause more harm than good. What harm? To whom? When you look at Texarkana through that lens, it stops feeling like a case gone cold and starts feeling like a case kept cold. Fear wasn't just stalking the streets. It was sitting behind desks, wearing badges, holding the keys to the evidence room, and the people who lived there knew it. They could feel it. When the phantom kills stopped, there was no celebration, just a heavier silence, because deep down, they knew someone had decided when it would end. Not the killer. Someone else. That's why decades later, survivors and witnesses still hesitate to talk. It's not just the trauma. It's the sense that someone powerful wanted this buried, and men like that don't stop watching just because the years pass. If you ever wonder why the truth never came out, maybe it did. And the people who spoke it were erased before anyone could hear. Texarkana learned to live with ghosts by pretending they weren't there. The town didn't solve the murders. It outlasted them. And sometimes, outlasting is more dangerous than solving. People stopped asking who the phantom was. They stopped demanding answers from the police. They stopped reading the files, stopped talking about the blood on the gravel, stopped pointing out the men who didn't look nervous enough. It wasn't fear of the killer anymore. It was fear of what the truth might reveal about the town itself. Families wanted normalcy, not justice. Business owners wanted tourists, not reporters. Officials wanted quiet streets, not a scandal that crossed state lines. So the silence became an agreement.
Don't ask too many questions. Don't say the wrong name in the wrong bar. Don't remind people that some of their neighbors were suspects. Or worse, protected. By the 1950s, new generations were growing up on the legend, not the facts. They didn't know the smell of cordite in the trees, or the sound of boots crunching gravel outside their car window. To them, the phantom was already a story told to scare teenagers, a shadow from the past that didn't matter anymore, but the ones who were there never forgot. They just trained themselves not to speak. And over time, even that silence became part of the myth. A whole town holding its breath, waiting for something they swore would never return. Because if the truth ever came out, it wouldn't just unmask the killer. It would unmask everyone who kept him hidden. Sheriffs who buried evidence, reporters who backed off a story, civilians who looked the other way because the suspect was their cousin, their boss, their friend. It was easier to forget. Easier to let the phantom become a movie villain than admit he had once been flesh and blood, walking their streets, shaking their hands. And that's how a crime becomes legend. Not because you solve it, but because you smother it under so much silence that it can never die. They called him the Phantom because no one ever saw his face. But masks aren't just leather or cloth, they're power. A mask is permission to do the unthinkable without consequence. And in Texarkana, the mask wasn't just over one man's face, it was over the whole town. The killer wore it when he pulled the trigger, the officials wore it when they buried the truth, and the people wore it when they pretended not to see. That's why this story never ends. Because the phantom was never just one man. The phantom is what happens when darkness learns how to blend in. Look around any city, any small town. The mask is still there. It's on the stranger who never meets your eye. It's on the powerful man who smiles too easily when blood is in the water. It's on the systems that tell you to stay calm, to sit tight, to trust them while the bodies pile up. You were told monsters look like monsters, but the phantom proved they don't. They look like neighbors, like cops, like friends. They walk among you by day and vanish by night, because when enough people agree not to pull the mask away, evil doesn't have to hide. It gets paraded down Main Street. The Moonlight Murders didn't just terrify Texarkana. They trained it. They taught people how to keep quiet. They taught officials how to control a narrative. And they taught the rest of us a lesson we keep ignoring. That real power is never held by the man with the gun, but by the ones who make sure he never gets caught. That's why the phantom is still alive, not in body, but in blueprint. The mask didn't rot in a shallow grave. It changed hands, and it always will, because the kind of evil that hides behind silence never dies. It just waits for someone new to put it on. They will tell you the phantom is dead. They will point to dusty case files, fading photographs, and the grave markers of old suspects. They will tell you monsters like that don't survive the decades, but evil doesn't age, it doesn't retire. It doesn't leave a corpse for you to bury. The phantom never died because he was never just a man. He was an idea. A mask anyone could wear. And once a mask proves it works, someone always picks it up. That's why the Moonlight Murders still haunt Texarkana, even when no shots are fired. It's why couples still glance over their shoulders on empty roads. It's why survivors still lock their doors at night, even 70 years later, as if they know something the rest of us don't, because the phantom wasn't caught. He was allowed to disappear. And when power decides a killer should vanish, you should start asking who the mask was really protecting. Look around you now. In your own town, on your own street. Do you really think evil disappeared with the 1940s? Do you really think no one's wearing the mask today? Maybe it's a man you pass every morning. Maybe it's someone who smiles at you in the store. Maybe it's someone waiting for darkness and silence to do their work. Just like Texarkana in 1946, the phantom lives on because silence keeps him alive, because towns keep burying the truth to protect themselves, because people like you are told to move along, to forget, to stop asking questions. But remember this, every legend begins as someone's reality. Every mask is worn by real hands, and every time you choose not to see, the phantom wins. So ask yourself, when the footsteps crunch outside your window, when the engine idles too long on your street, when fear makes your neighbors look the other way? Will you recognize the mask before it's too late? The phantom never died, because the phantom was never just a man. He was a blueprint. And tonight, somewhere, someone new is already wearing it.